Welcome to the Quote Sandwich mini lesson. Before we start, I want you to think about the most powerful quote you can remember from your favorite movie or book. If you can remember who said it, attribute it to him or her. Why do you like it? How do you remember it? How is that quote different from other quotes in that text? Pause the video and think about those questions. For most of you, maybe you picked a quote because it stuck out in your mind, maybe it was really important to the plot, maybe you liked it and could apply it to your own life. We often use quotes to strengthen our own writing, and in this lesson, you're going to learn how to fully incorporate a quote without just sticking it in your paragraph. So first, let's take a look at really famous quotes from movies and books. I'll be back from The Terminator. It kind of comes up throughout the movie. Luke, I am your father, the big reveal. Spoiler here, sorry kids. And from The Fault in Our Stars, okay, okay. The quotes that we've just seen are really integral to the plot, to the characters, and are short and succinct and tell you more about the story. Let's also review what goes into a paragraph now that we've talked a little bit about important quotes. You start with your topic sentence. You have your first detail. You elaborate or explain that detail. You have your second detail. You elaborate and explain that detail, and then you have your wrap-up sentence. Why do we need quotes at all? If you're writing a literary analysis essay, it's often important to use quotes, and using an exact quote from the text can help drive your point home harder than just paraphrasing or stating it in your own words. When you're using a quote, it's important to remember that the quote needs to make your words or your answer stronger. If the quote doesn't make your answer stronger, but a paraphrase or your own words would work just as fine, then you don't need to include that quote. What about when you're using a quote as a supporting detail in a literary analysis essay or paragraph? When you're using quotes to support your point, you need to make a quote sandwich, and we're going to use this sandwich analogy throughout the lesson. You introduce your quote. What is it from? What's going on? Who is talking? What's the situation? You state your quote. Then you explain the value of the quote. Why are you including it in your response? So let's take a look at an example of a quote sandwich. And again, I have up here on the slide what needs to be included in the quote sandwich. In the article, former Atlanta educators found guilty in cheating scandal. Teachers from Atlanta were found guilty of changing students' test scores. Their changed tests made it seem like the students knew more than they did. Based on the false results, students were often passed on to the next grade, although they couldn't read, write, or do basic math. Teachers were motivated to lie to make students seem as if they were mastering the content, even though they clearly could not demonstrate it on the state exams. Before I include the quote, which starts here, where they change their tests, I state what the article is, and also summarize the article in one sentence. Afterwards, I explain why I'm including it in this detail at all. A quote sandwich is only part of the paragraph meal. So if we look at the paragraph requirements again, if you look at these red bullet points right here, that's where your quote sandwich would go. It's only one detail and one elaborator. You would still need to include another detail and elaboration. Let's look at the whole paragraph put together, and the section in red is the quote sandwich section. In the article, former Atlanta educators found guilty in cheating scandal. The motivation behind the lie was to raise student test scores. In the article, teachers from Atlanta were found guilty of changing students' test scores. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, their changed tests made it seem like the students knew more than they did. Based on the false results, students were often passed on to the next grade level, although they couldn't read, write, or do basic math. Teachers were motivated to lie to make students seem as if they were mastering the content, even though they clearly could not demonstrate it on the state exams. Okay, now we transition away from the quote sandwich, and we have our second supporting detail. Teachers were also motivated to change the scores because if they did not, they were fired or shamed by the school and county. Though clearly the unethical choice, teachers felt like they didn't have any other option if the standards and expectations of high scores continued to rise. It is clear that something needs to change when it comes to judging students for their students' test scores. All right, now you should have the tools to appropriately include quotes and quote sandwiches into your paragraph. So at this point, you're going to move on to the next activity, which includes writing a quote sandwich.